The traditional owners of the land on which we gather. I'm currently situated on the Wurundjeri people's land and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I acknowledge that we are sitting at our laptops on varying land today, and I also want to extend my respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present for this virtual meeting today. So a big warm welcome to today's alumni event brought to you by your OCGA as part of the Be Inspired Create Opportunity series. Today's event is called Building a Startup for Success, and it'll be an interactive fireside chat. My name is Frances Goh. I graduated from Carey in 2006, and I'm currently the Director of Strategy and Innovation at the management consulting firm Connect, as well as the Head of Community at One Room, a collective movement reshaping work for women. Now, before I have the pleasure of introducing our very special guest and my good friend Judy Anderson, I'd like to go through some quick housekeeping things. Firstly, please have your video on if you feel comfortable, but I just wanted to note that today's session will be recorded for anyone who's interested in revisiting it later. Please put yourself on mute if you're not speaking or as advised by Judy throughout the session. And finally, I'll be present to connect with you through the chat function. So please pop all your comments and questions in there. I'll be collecting your questions for Judy and I'll facilitate them on your behalf. So without further ado, I'm so excited to be welcoming Judy Anderson today. Judy graduated from Carey in 2007 and is the CEO of Startup Victoria, which is a non-profit community organisation set up to support founder success. Startup Victoria's community numbers over 25,000 practicing and aspiring startup founders, investors, service providers, entrepreneurial educators, and other supporters. Judy is also an advisory board member at Code for Australia, as well as a member of the Victorian Government Innovation Task Force, advising on programs to develop local tech talent, support local entrepreneurs and startups to scale, and advance priority and emerging industry sectors and promote Victorian innovation to the world. So today, Judy and I will be covering a wide range of topics about the startup sector, the landscape, why the sector is a place for future jobs, and what skills, both new and transferable, will help you to take advantage of the opportunities this sector affords, as well as the different types of roles that you might consider. So that's a lot of information from me to you. I'd love to throw over to Judy now. So Judy, to open with, could you please give us an overview of the startup sector?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me today. And g'day everyone. My name's Judy, as Fran said, and I'm really excited to be here. Hopefully answer some of your questions and give you an insight onto what's happening in the startup community here in Victoria and Australia. I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. For me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And if you're not sure who your traditional owners are for where you're working right now, I know that even though we're connecting virtually, we're all physically dispersed, and if you're not sure where that is, I've just posted a link to a map, or if you just type in your postcode, it will tell you who you can acknowledge. So that's where should I start? What was your question? Sorry, Fran.
All good. Just wanting an overview of the startup sector. Give us a lay of the land.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I might just start, if you can turn your cameras on. I just want to start by just, I guess, knowing what kind of baseline knowledge I'm working with. So if you know a little bit about the startup ecosystem, could you just give me a little bit of a wave? Cool, couple of hands. Okay, I'm gonna, a few hands. All right, cool. So there's a little bit of base knowledge. So for those who weren't waving their hands, I might just start with what a startup actually is, because there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace between startups and small businesses. So a startup is a new company that is typically using technology or has some sort of innovation, whether it's a new product, service, business model, or delivery model or channel. It's new and innovative in some kind of way, typically using tech. I'm so sorry, my partner just got home and there's a lot of background noise in the kitchen. Hopefully you can still hear me, the working from home life. So this is a new company that's set up, but it's designed to scale. So they're founded by entrepreneurs who have a vision to grow a big company, employ lots of people, solve a big problem, and create, for a lot of people, a company that's worth $1 billion or more. So quite a large scale company that typically want to operate globally and not just service a local market. So Sometimes they do get confused with a small business just because they often start out small. It's just one founder or a couple of co-founders working in a co-working space to build a new product. And then they employ a couple of people, and then before you know it, they have a few dozen customers, then a few hundred customers, a few thousand customers, and then they become a scaling business, or what you might have heard the term scale up. So that's typically when they're earning about at least $1 million annual recurring revenue, and they're growing quite quickly, typically 30% month on month. So that's the main difference, is when you have a small business, more like a lifestyle business, you are doing it for independence, to be your own boss. And, you know, for example, like if you want to start a fish and chip shop, or if you want to start an online furniture company, like chances are you probably don't want to scale to the same level as a startup. So that's, I guess, the first thing, is like what a startup actually is. So high growth business that's usually using technology or innovation. In terms of the state of play, the Victorian startup community is still pretty infant compared to some big startup ecosystems across the world. So you'll all have heard of, you know, what happens in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area in the United States, very popular for entrepreneurship. You've got the likes of Facebook, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, etc., coming out of the Bay Area. But we have other very popular and very mature ecosystems like Tel Aviv in Israel, Berlin in Europe, of course London, and even Singapore, all much more mature ecosystems than the Australian startup landscape. For a few reasons. First of all, they've been doing it a lot longer, probably about 15, 20 years more than Australians have been really making a full-blown crack at this industry. And they've also got significantly greater amounts of capital, so venture capital flooding into these startups as well. So Australia, to give you some stats, we're not even in the 25 top ecosystems globally when compared to other cities across the world, but we were pegged as the 5th fastest growing startup ecosystem anywhere in the world last year by Startup Genome. So we're catching up pretty quick. The only other thing I'd say, just in terms of a state of play, even though we don't have the same level of investment capital as other industry cities across the world, we do have some really great heroes. So some famous startup companies you might have heard of would be companies like Seek, REA, Car Sales. They're sort of like the first wave of tech startups that came out of Australia, but now you've got this second wave. So companies like Atlassian, Airwallex, Envato, Culture Amp, they're sort of coming up as the next ones. And then you've got a lot of early stage, smaller startups that you may have come across, like The Dirt Company, Your Grocer, Brossa, and others. So we've got about 15 to 1800 startups in Victoria at the moment. That is down from last year. Coronavirus took a good whack off of the top end of some of those startups. And we do have about 25,000 people in the Startup Victoria community, which actually makes us one of the largest entrepreneurship groups in Australia.
Amazing, Judy. That's really optimistic to hear, even though we're not in the top 25 yet, that we are growing really quickly, and that's definitely something that we're starting to see emerge. I was wondering if you could tell us just a little bit more around why the startup sector is a place for future jobs specifically.
Yeah, and this has actually been something that before coronavirus, we had to lobby and argue this case pretty heavily to Victorian government. And a lot of it goes to that confusion I spoke about before around the difference between a startup and a small business. But it's been very interesting because since coronavirus, the tech community has actually been one of the growing industries off the back of COVID. And so what we're seeing is that the jobs that are being created in startups, it's not just a one-for-one job. So you create a job at a startup, and that job is actually a multiplier job because that person is working to grow a business that then creates more jobs. So it isn't a one job equals one job. So funding jobs in startups actually creates more jobs because those people are working on growing a business. So building a product, growing a customer base, and actually putting more revenue into that business to create new jobs. So that's the kind of first reason, is like, it's not just one job, it's a multiplier. The second reason is the type of skills that you're actually building when you're working in a startup job. So these are the jobs of the future. So a lot of startups, the skills that are required, like it's data science and analytics, it's machine learning, writing algorithms, it's coding, developing, software engineering, it's user experience design, customer experience journey mapping, it's customer success, which is just a fancy term for customer service. It's the same thing, but sales, marketing. So there are also traditional roles in startups as well. So if you don't have deep tech experience, you don't know how to code, you don't know how to write algorithms for AI, you don't know how to do data analytics or data science, that's okay. Like, these are still businesses. They need HR, they need finance, they need accounting, they need legal, they need all the traditional jobs as well. They need office managers and people managers. So a lot of the jobs that you'll see in startups are jobs that are actually going to be working in innovative products and services. And so, yeah, upskilling people for the future as well.
I love that. And I know that the World Economic Forum actually recently released their Jobs of the Future report just last month in October. And I wanted to take a moment actually to share my screen and expand on your point, Judy, around those skills. So I just wanted to share with everyone who might be interested here some of the top skills for 2025. So looking at 5 years from now, even what's going to be really important. And a lot of those skills Judy mentioned are transferable ones, and even more so are these ones that have come out of the World Economic Forum. And you'll see that a lot of them are actually soft skills, you know, things that we probably wouldn't have expected to come up a little while ago. So look, I'll post the link to the report and you can read this in your own time, but I just wanted to point out a few things like, oh yeah, and I can see some people are taking photos with their phones. So I'll leave it up here for an extra second. But look, even the top 5 are things like analytical thinking, innovation. We've got active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, and creativity. And before anyone here says I'm not creative, in a previous life, Judy and I, when we worked together, we taught, you know, creativity and innovation skills. So it's really, I think, optimistic and uplifting to know that even these top 5 skills people will be hunting for in their employees in 5 years are all learnable, all trainable. We can all develop these. So I think that's something that's important to know going into the future, even just the next 5 years. These are the next sort of 10 skills. You know, resilience is up there, reasoning, emotional intelligence. So these are all things that, you know, are going to hold us in good stead post-COVID, pandemic, recession, and, you know, into the future. So even persuasion and negotiation made it into there in the top 15. And, you know, the flip side, I think, is true, where people with really hard skills in programming, data analytics, will also be needing to develop these skills by the same token. So those people will need, you know, to have emotional intelligence, service orientation, and those types of critical thinking skills as well. The other thing, you know, us being consultants, we love graphs, well, I do, I thought it would be interesting to share is the top cross-cutting specialized skills of the future. So cross-cutting means transferable skills, skills that work across lots of different industries and roles. And so on the left-hand column, we've got specialized skills, but on the right-hand side, we've got these emerging job clusters. So what are the different types of jobs out there that will also be needing skills like, you know, advertising and digital marketing? So I'll share the link in here in our chat, and you can read up on that report in your own time. It's got a lot of interesting information there about jobs of the future. But I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'd love to throw back again to Judy. Judy, my next question to you is, how has COVID-19 impacted the startup sector?
I mean, just like every industry, we certainly weren't immune to the challenges of COVID-19. I think what we saw, just like anyone personally, right? Like January, like, oh yeah, that's a bit of a problem over there. That sucks for them. February, oh, that's, yeah, keep an eye on it. March, oh shit. And then April, like it was just panic stations for every founder, entrepreneur and investor across the ecosystem. So what we saw in sort of March and April was basically a lot of founders diving into their cash flow forecast. So the way a lot of startups run is not every founder is fueled by venture capital, so external funding from an investor, whether that be an angel or a traditional VC. A lot of them are bootstrapped or independent or are sort of debt backed, but for a good majority, they are investment backed. And when you are backed by a big VC firm, you're given hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of funding to focus on growth. And every message you're told as an entrepreneur is to grow, 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 spend that money, use that money, like hire people, build products, spend it on sales and marketing. And what we saw almost overnight was a complete 180. So everyone sort of reversed that and went, don't spend a single dollar, cut every cost you can find. Literally founders who probably hadn't spent much time in their cash flow forecast, going line item by line item, literally taking out every cost that they possibly could. And what the advice that we had been given from founders who had survived the GFC and other financial crises across the world the startups that survived that period were the ones that got off of planet optimism and jumped onto planet pessimism and just knew that they needed 18 to 24 months runway, so enough cash in bank to cover all of their costs, assuming they have no income and no revenue for the next 18 to 24 months. And what that meant is, for the first time, rather than creating jobs, founders were looking at dropping people to part-time, making people redundant. And so I think that the stress and the anxiety that you could feel amongst the community was very real, because these are founders that, first of all, everything they're doing as a founder, as they're growing their business, they're doing for the first time. As their business grows, so does their skill set, and everything they're doing for the first time as a leader. So a lot of figuring out as people went, basically, during March and April, and making some tough decisions. What we saw over the next coming months is there were the hard winners and hard losers were obvious basically straight away. You had hard winners that actually, just through luck of the draw, experienced tremendous growth. One startup that's Melbourne-based, for example, is Who Gives a Crap. Everyone know Who Gives a Crap, the toilet paper online subscription company. They're a startup founder member, Simon Griffiths. Like, they sold out of toilet paper like that. Their problem, but again, like, just as challenging, because they were experiencing exponential growth that they hadn't planned for. So again, a very busy period trying to service the increased demand that they hadn't forecast. And then we saw some extreme losers, Glam Corner, which is a online dress rental company to hire sort of designer and top-end dresses to go to events, weddings, functions, balls, etc. I mean, events weren't happening, and their business basically died overnight, and you had to find ways to pivot, and we've seen some amazing pivots. So businesses whose market just dried up seemingly overnight. A lot of B2B businesses who are working in enterprise, even though corporates seemingly have more money than startups, like, they weren't spending, it was just policy. So they basically had to batten down the hatches. They've been focusing on improving their product or their service, because often as they've been growing quite quickly, like, things are duct taped together, right? Like, when you're building a business, it's just slapping stuff on the moving car as you're building it. And so a lot of teams have just battened down the hatches. They're running essential stuff only to keep costs down, and they're focusing on fixing any holes in their product. The other thing that we've seen is investor confidence. We don't have enough data really to know for sure yet, but in the big VC firms, deals are still getting done. So Host Plus, big superannuation firm, poured millions of dollars into Square Peg Capital, which is one of the biggest VC firms in Australia, to continue to write checks. So deals are still being done. At the seed stage, so like smaller checks, like sort of less than 500K typically in Australia, they're still really hard to get because a lot of angels, so high net worth individuals, typically, if you've got a portfolio, you've diversified your investments, a lot of that might have been in the share market, and they were worth 60% of what they were worth overnight. So investor confidence at the angel stage is lower as well. So a bit of a mixed bag. COVID basically slapped startups in the face like it did everyone. There were some winners, some losers. But the other thing that we've seen, which is really encouraging, is we've seen this huge influx. Now, as we're sort of away from the first shock of what was hitting our economy, around June, July, August, we've seen this huge influx of new founders. And I'm talking like hundreds, like almost, I think it's over 1,000 people at this point who've joined the Startup Victoria community that we've never met before, that are brand new, that want to start their own business. And these are people that have either been made redundant, been dropped to part-time, or for whatever reason, the crisis has sort of changed their perspective and made them want to work for themselves or solve a problem that they really care about. So we've had hundreds of new people start their own businesses and want to build something new. And that's really encouraging, because a lot of those businesses, they're not just another e-commerce platform selling you stuff that you don't need. A lot of them are solving problems in the health and medtech space and the impact for purpose space. And in fintech where there's inequality. So we're seeing some really cool new businesses come out of the pandemic as well.
That's amazing, Judy, and indeed very encouraging. I think that given the experience that every industry has had, it seems like the startup one is definitely the one that's bouncing back really well and growing, as you mentioned earlier. And so I wanted to ask you, can you share some of the typical roles that are in a startup?
Yes, and I wrote some of them down. Sorry, I'm just going to look over at my other screen because I didn't want to forget them. So most typical roles that you'll see in a startup, you'll hear the word like product. So what basically what that means is like you're working on building whatever you're selling to your customers. And That could be a literal product, like you're selling online toilet paper. So you're designing the actual product, the supply chain, like how it actually works, the design of what you're actually putting in front of customers, you're working with their feedback. Or in most cases, it's a tech product. So you're a coder, software engineer, developer, you're actually sitting down and writing lines of code, building a platform, whether that be an app or a web platform or a piece of software. You're focused on actually like, how does this thing work? Like, what is someone actually buying? Another typical role would be sales and marketing or BD. So depending on the startup, if you're in like a B2C business, typically sales and marketing is, you'll hear the word like growth hacking, just another like fancy startup term for basically digital marketing. So you're writing Facebook ads, you're doing social media content posting, you're potentially working with influencers on Instagram. You're basically trying to get your product or your service in front of as many customers as possible, and you're going for reach. If you're B2B, so for example, let's say you're a enterprise software as a service company, then it's typically more like a traditional sales and marketing role. So it's more about relationships and getting in with a senior level executive as a first customer and rolling your software out across the business. So a bit more of a traditional BD role. Customer success, I mentioned it before, it's another sort of fancy startup role, but it's basically customer service. So again, it's typically a B2B role. Let's say, for example, like MYOB, fintech software to help with managing your own accounts. They've got a whole team of customer success managers, and their job is for people who have already bought the product and service that they remain their customer rather than going to a competitor. So finding bugs, finding new features to build that are going to add more value to their experience as a customer. Other roles are the traditional roles that I mentioned before. So office managers are still needed, HR, so people like developing people, talent, recruitment, also still really important, accountants, finance, legal, they're all still also really important roles in a growing business. And data science, obviously. Like, I think it was actually really great to see the World Economic Forum table that you shared, Fran, because I was like, oh, good to see that our like gut feel of what roles are the most commonly being hired at Startup Vic for our jobs board, and just knowing what our members are talking about actually matches the statistical data from the World Economic Forum, which is a big focus on artificial intelligence, data science, and algorithms. And not just that, like if you're not the type of person who particularly wants to go and learn how to code or wants to learn about data science, a lot of those more analytical skills are still really important, because it's one thing to have an algorithm, but what's the algorithm solving? Like, what's the problem that you're solving? Like, so being able to do that critical thinking, that creative thinking, and actually using that technology to solve a real problem is also just arguably more important.
Definitely, as we saw on that list, it was like right up there. So thank you for sharing that, Judy. That was super detailed and heaps of roles. So I'm glad you wrote that down. I wanted to then segue into how would someone transition into a startup? So I know you and I actually have quite traditional backgrounds, me with investment banking, and Judy, you spent a number of years at Deloitte heading up their innovation team there. So how would someone, I guess, I've got a three-pronged question. The first one, can you please share how someone who's maybe a fresh graduate out of university could transition into startups versus someone who's perhaps had a corporate or professional services role, how they would transition into a startup, and then someone who's in completely a different industry with completely different background, how they would transition into the startup sector?
Yeah, totally. I think both have their challenges and both have their advantages. If you're a fresh graduate, you've just finished university, like what a time to try and find a job. That is, yeah, now is a very interesting time. If you have gone to one of the major universities in the state of Victoria or even elsewhere in the world, so like a Melbourne, a Monash or La Trobe, a Deakin, an RMIT, somewhere like that, big uni, a lot of them all have graduate placement programs. So for example, there's a program ran out of the University of Melbourne called Tinelli Vita, and it actually takes students who are interested in entrepreneurship and technology and startups and places them in an internship program within a startup. So there are actual programs that you can participate in. I think a lot of them are actually free as well to get work experience in a startup. And obviously once you've got a foot in the door, the rest is up to you, right? In terms of building your relationships and trying to find a more permanent position there within the organization. Another way to do it is to volunteer directly with the startup. So a lot of founders are very accessible via socials, like Twitter will be the main one you'll find a lot of startup founders on. And I've heard great stories of graduates that basically just harassed the founder of a startup that they thought was really cool on Twitter and got themselves a graduate job or an internship that turned into a paid position down the line. So that's another option. Another thing to do is that the early, if you have trained in like some of the more hard skills, like actually apply directly for the job. So like there are some great jobs boards out there in the startup community. Airtree has a Google sheet with, Airtree is one of the main VC firms here in Australia. They've got a publicly accessible Google sheet with all of the jobs that are currently available in all the companies in their portfolio, and a lot of them are junior roles. So actually go through a traditional recruitment channel. The other thing as well is for mid-career people. So if you have not worked in startups, but you're looking to change and reskill and jump ship mid-career, if you're interested in building up some of the deeper tech skills, like you actually like the sound of coding or developing or software engineering or data science, you don't have to go and do a full course at university and get a whole other degree. There are lots of micro-credentialing organisations that also happen to be startups that exist in Australia. So Academy XI is a great example. You can do a short course with Academy XI to learn customer experience design, software engineering, etc. General Assembly is another one. It's actually a New York-based startup, but they've got an office here in Melbourne. They all do virtual training programs as well, so you could do one of those courses, and I believe through part of them they actually have placements that you can do as part of those courses as well. Otherwise, mid-career skilling, like the biggest thing to do to get into a startup if you haven't entered this space before is to network. And I know in some places networking can feel like a bit of a dirty word, but the community in Victoria is incredibly open. It's very open, it's very accessible, and it's a lot of how people get there. Like this same old saying, it's like it's who you know. So if you can put in some face time at networking events, at startup community events where those founders are pitching or they're speaking, building your network personally and finding that right opportunity at the right time would be the way to go. Oh, sorry, one last thing. You could put yourself on the map of a startup recruiter. So you could actually list yourself as talent for a startup recruiter, because particularly scale-ups, they're actually looking, they're not looking for like entrepreneurship talent. Like they've got all of the chaos tolerance that joined in the early days of their startup. Now, as they're becoming a bigger business, then they need more structure. They're actually looking for people who have enterprise experience and know what it's like to work and run a more established business. So some startup recruiters in Victoria, Mitchell Lake is one, Affix is another, and Scale and Swing. So you could list yourself in your resume as talent when they're looking for some of those more experienced jobs as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Judy. So it sounds like there's really fantastic entry points at every stage of the startup, but also at every stage of our careers, no matter where we are, whether we're right at the start or in the middle and more progressed, because yeah, those specific scale ups or startups will be looking for those. So those are wonderful resources. Thank you for sharing that, Judy. I wanted to go back to what you were saying before around the innovations that we've seen come out of COVID and some really fantastic pivots. I know, for example, there are events companies I've seen that have now become florists and are, going gangbusters. So, and Providor, for example, helping restaurants. So do you have a favorite innovation or pivot that's come out of COVID?
I think my favorite pivot, which it doesn't sound that, I'm going to try and find a way to like explain how good it really is, because it sounds really dull. So basically there's a Melbourne-based startup called Amazing Co, and their whole business, and before COVID, they were like sort of pegged as like one to watch. They were growing quite quickly. They'd been invested by some pretty well-respected investors in the community, and the founders had great credibility. They built startups before, so it was like one to watch. And what the Amazing Co business was sort of tailor-made experiences. Basically like a red balloon, but tailored to you and not a voucher. You actually purchase this like hand-designed experience, and it would be things to do with loved ones, friends, family, partners, etc. Obviously, doing in-person experiences died overnight, and they pivoted their business to an online events experience company. And I know that sounds really obvious and really simple, but it's just not that easy. As you all know, like Zoom fatigue is something we're all experiencing. Finding the right providers to still make an online experience profitable and enjoyable, and something that people actually will pay money for. So now they've got online, like a lot of the, if anyone's been given a gift by Amazing Co, I'd actually love to hear that story. It's like from your couch wine tasting experiences and things like that. So they turned their business around. They're now back on a path to profitability, when, you know, back in March or April, they thought they might actually have to wind up. So that's probably one of my favorite pivots, because it's a Melbourne example. In terms of ones that's growing really strong, a really great story, I think, is Your Grocer. Is anyone here a customer of Your Grocer? No? So Your Grocer is a Melbourne-based startup that is an online a grocery shopping business to actually buy your groceries from small independent sellers. So rather than getting all your groceries from the big supermarket duopoly, you can get your steak from the butcher, your bread from the independent baker down the road, your herbs from the special herb place, and your fruit and veg actually fresh from the farmer's market. But for a lot of people, the problem that they want to buy local, but it's too hard to go to all those different shops just to get like enough ingredients for the dinner you want to make. So Your Grocer, you can basically shop from all the independent retailers on their store, and then they'll go around and pick it all up for you and then deliver it to your door in one box. So that business was sort of, touch and go. They were growing really slowly. They'd have a few good months and they'd have to go back again. They'd have a couple of good months. So sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. And then obviously since COVID hit, everyone first of all wants to buy local. So they really want to support Australian businesses to help boost the economy. And then secondly, they also don't want to go to the supermarket because of health concerns. So having groceries delivered to your door was incredibly popular. So now they have more growth than they can cater to. There's a wait list to join Your Grocer. So I think that's another great example that we've seen. And I hope that support continues beyond the current economic trends we see for consumer behaviour.
Yes, definitely. I hope so too. I've written that down, Your Grocer. That sounds awesome. All right, so we've talked a lot about, the startup sector in general, and I want to come back to, career progression as well. I know, Judy, that you've had quite a varied career, so I was wondering if, you might share your pathway and your journey, because it's quite non-traditional, arguably in some senses as well. If you want to share where you started and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, just really practically speaking, because I think my chairman had a heart attack when he found out my age. He nearly fell off his chair, which is probably for the best. But I guess how I got to where I am now. So graduated Carey 2007, had the age-old question, when you're 18, like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And, it feels like you have to decide that then and there in choosing what you study. And I chose to study entrepreneurship at RMIT. Because business in high school was a subject that I always really enjoyed. How you have some subjects that feel like work and others that don't. Business was something that just came really naturally to me. I really enjoyed it. Funnily enough, choosing entrepreneurship at RMIT at the time, it was a very new degree. I got a lot of judgment from my peers at school because I didn't go to Monash or Melbourne. I was perceived as being really dumb because I was going to RMIT, and people were like, oh, you must have gotten a low enter score. A lot of judgment, but got a good enter score. I could have gone and done commerce at Melbourne, but I wanted to study entrepreneurship. I wanted to learn how to start my own business. So I guess the first thing that helped me in my career path was just backing myself and not listening to what other people thought I should do. So that was kind of the first thing. So I studied entrepreneurship. In that degree, the actual methodology that I learned in school, I don't use any of that today. It's all outdated. We learned how to write a business plan and, guerrilla marketing and stuff like that. We didn't learn lean startup, or a business model canvas, the kind of things that you would learn today. But the thing that I did get from that course was this incredible network of people who wanted to do kind of the same kind of thing like me. I basically found my tribe, people that wanted to solve problems and sort of maybe wanted to opt out of a dominant ideology in pursuit of a career that, really felt great. And so after my degree, the last semester, I did a placement program with Deloitte. So RMIT had a partnership with Deloitte where you would go in for 3 months and you would solve one of their problems as a team of students. Did that, failed, didn't do very well, but I met some mentors in Deloitte at that point. So that's when networking became really important because I kept those relationships fresh. And after the course, I was looking for a job. Turns out entrepreneurship at that time was a really unemployable degree unless you wanted to start your own business. No one really kind of saw any value in it. And I wasn't a right fit for any traditional graduate program because it was so obscure at the time. So I couldn't find a job, so I ended up selling toilets for a little while at Reese Bathroom Life, which was very unglamorous, but it paid the bills. And then about 12 months later, after applying for several roles in the innovation team at Deloitte, I finally got the right role with the right team, and I got a sort of admin coordinator role, very junior, just fixing up spreadsheets and coordinating events and doing all the basic kind of stuff. But I had a foot in the door. And then over my next sort of 2.5 years at Deloitte, I progressed up to become the director of the innovation program for the firm for Australia, which was focusing on internal innovation. So basically my job was to help all of the product service lines of Deloitte to find a solution, a problem that a client had, and come up with an innovative tech-based solution. We had a microfund portfolio of about $1 million that we'd allocate to experiment those ideas. After a few years of doing that, tax innovation certainly wasn't getting me out of bed in the morning. And also what we were doing was just based on what we reckoned was going to work. And that didn't really vibe well with me. So long story short, ended up in an innovation consultancy called Inventium, which uses science-based innovation psychology, which is where I work with Frances. So they use neuroscience, organizational psychology, and management science to teach big organizations how to innovate. Did that for about 4.5 years, worked up from a junior consultant to be the head of our Sydney office, moved to Sydney, started up our Sydney office, and I was running a tour for our executive clients for the Asia Pac region in Silicon Valley, where we take them on a tour of all the different startups that were over there. So, you know, Google, Dropbox, Uber, Zendesk, those kind of companies. And I was sitting in a room with Alan Blue, who's the co-founder of LinkedIn, former co-founder of PayPal. And he was just so brilliant, and he was such a fantastic entrepreneur. And I realized, I was like, oh my God, I've spent like the better part of a decade working in the corporate world. And I started out wanting to be an entrepreneur and wanting to work alongside people like you, like you're brilliant. Like you're the one that's changing the world. You know, not like so that was sort of my come to Jesus moment where I thought I've got to stop working at the top end of town, teaching people how to protect themselves from the disruption of startups and go where the people are that I admire, which is the founders. So I moved back to Melbourne. And that's when Startup Vic came knocking. Again, that was just through my network and the relationships that I'd kept warm and friendly throughout my career. The job was posted in the Startup Vic newsletter, and 2 people who I'd worked with previously on the same day, in the same hour, forwarded me that email and said, you'd be perfect for this. So long story short, met up with the board, and here I am. I've been in the role for 2.5 years.
Yeah, and you left out that you said no as well.
I did say no. So I went through the recruitment process, and then I was to the final stage, and then I actually turned down the job for CEO of Startup Vic. And I had some like bullshit reason at the time that wasn't like the real reason, but I was trying to convince myself it was the real reason. And after a bit of sort of self-reflection, I really just said no because I was scared. Like I was scared that I wouldn't be able to do it. Like I've been a consultant my whole life. I've never managed a company. I didn't know anything about P&L. I didn't know anything about recruitment. I didn't know, like I knew how to do events and facilitation and keynote speaking and executive coaching. Like I didn't know how to run a business. Like, so I was like, oh, that's a dumb reason to say no to something because I'm scared that I won't be able to do it. Like when I really looked at it, I was like, right, well, they think I can do it. So I should do it. And I was very lucky that they still took me when I came back. So yeah.
And that is the epic story of how Judy Anderson became CEO of Startup Victoria. Thank you, Judy. That was brilliant. And I think we have a lot to learn from that, you know, and I think there are a lot of things that we are already practicing. But, you know, for me, one of the key things which you actually mentioned right at the start of your story, even going into your uni degree, was about backing yourself. And I think at a time like this, we all need to do a bit more of that, especially if we're looking into going into, you know, more unknown spaces or places that are unfamiliar to us, such as startups. And so to that point, you, through your story, mentioned some skills. So I know we've been talking a lot about skills of the future, hard skills, soft skills, but, you know, there are other things that I think some of us can learn ourselves that don't take up too much time, we can read up on. And Judy, you mentioned lean startup and design thinking. Do you want to talk a little, just really briefly about that, how we can pick those skills up, where we can learn about it, and, you know, any other type of skills in that category that would be helpful for joining a startup?
Totally. So there's definitely some like must reads for joining. And like just they're not necessarily like you can build a business and never read any of these books. Like it isn't like you have to read this book or your business won't be successful or you won't be able to work in a startup, but there's like some common frameworks, some common ways of thinking, some common terminology and language that, you know, will be helpful to get up to speed on. So the first is around like how to build a startup. So that would be The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. That's a process for inventing something new in a scrappy, lean way. Then there would be around startup communities. So Brad Feld, building startup communities, and his new book, Startup Community Way. Then another one by Brad Feld. Basically read anything from Brad Feld or Steve Blank or Eric Ries. Unfortunately, they're all dudes, but they're still very good. And the Brad Feld book to read is Venture Deals. So that is basically how investment works, explains all the terminology. What's a term sheet? What's a cap table? How's a deal done? What are the different stages of investment, common terms, things like that. Otherwise, other things, I mean, like there's like cultural symbols as well. So the startup community, by and large, like it is a very diverse community, but by and large, it does love science, philosophy, humanity, and like I feel like you'll walk into any startup office in Melbourne and you'll see a copy of *Sapiens*, which is like a history of humanity. Like I don't know, that one's more of like a hitter. I mean, there's a copy on my shelf, but I must admit I haven't read it. It was a gift, so you don't have to read that one. But it's like almost like, yeah, that's more of a cultural thing.
Brilliant. I do have quite a few more questions to ask, but I also just wanted to open it to the floor. If anyone has questions or if you want to type it in the chat box, I can ask it of Judy, because Judy and I have been talking straight. But did anyone want to jump in or ask any questions of Judy or myself?
I have a question. What sectors are going to grow in the future, I wonder, do you think, both of you? You know, it's about trying to see over the next mountain hill, isn't it? Anticipation.
Yeah, great question. So there's, I might start with some context on like what sectors are actually really strong already in Victoria, and like what makes something strong is basically like the density of startups, the success of their metrics of revenue, customers, employees, users, etc., and how well their product or service is actually solving a problem, and is the problem even worth solving. So sectors that are really strong for Victoria is the health and medtech sector. So we've got a really strong medical research precinct with the Royal Children's, Women's Health, and University of Melbourne and RMIT being into that precinct at the top end of the city. So a lot of health and medtech comes out of Victoria. Like for example, famous example, the cochlear hearing aid will be as an example. There's a new Medicrib that protects infants in ICU that was just come out of University of Melbourne and Western Health out of COVID. So like a lot of health and medtech. Another one is fintech. It was very strong prior to COVID, but it's been definitely had its knees chopped off since COVID, but fintech is also very strong. Sports tech, Melbourne is known as a sports hub, although we have lost the AFL. Hopefully we can get it back. Don't know what's happening with a lot of the big sporting events, but sports tech is another big one, as well as esports. Agriculture tech is another big one, as well as food science tech, so alternative proteins, etc., agricultural farming, like robotics, that kind of stuff. So yeah, sports tech, health tech, med tech, agriculture tech, and the last one would be impact and for purpose. So businesses that are fusing profit as well as purpose. So for example, you know, Your Grocer is an example. Who Gives a Crap is an impact and for purpose business. In terms of a big sector that is not very strong in Victoria, but is a space, is artificial intelligence and machine learning. So basically using AI to solve problems. That's not necessarily a sector, it's a technology that runs across all sectors, but that's also a big wave that's coming now. And like that will be the next wave of technology that we'll start to see coming out now. Like the last wave was marketplaces, you know, where you're like group A in group B, you know, like, you know what I'm talking about. Hopefully that makes sense in terms of marketplaces, but that was sort of the last wave, and AI machine learning being the next.
Very good.
Awesome. And I'll just add a little bit from, I guess, a global point of view, because IBIS has just released a industries of the future, again, a 2025 report. And they've actually mentioned some of the things that Judy's mentioned just then, but also throughout our conversation, such as organic farming, right? So that's related to ag tech. Cybersecurity is a big one and will continue to grow as well globally. And then, you know, within Australia specifically as well, coming back to what Judy said, and not just, you know, in the state of Victoria, but, you know, online grocery, you know, which speaks to that Your Grocer company that Judy just mentioned as well. So I will share this IBIS report as well to you. I'll link to that so that we can look at, you know, the industries that are growing.
I also, just while Fran's posting that, I just dumped a bunch of links in the chat. There's a lot more context and so many things I probably haven't had time to talk about today, but Startup Genome, that is a global ecosystem mapping report. It gives you like a lowdown on what the startup industry really is, what it takes to build an ecosystem, and the maturity of Melbourne specifically compared to other cities in the world. There's the LaunchVic dashboard. So LaunchVic is the state government startup agency that's here to fuel the growth of the startup ecosystem. It's had millions of dollars of government funding committed to it to distribute as grants across the industry, and they have had at least another 3-year term committed from the Premier. And that dashboard is basically who the startups are, who the investors are. It's new, so the data is still a little bit dodgy because it's done with the AI scraping tool, but we're hoping that that will improve over time as people self-report. There's also the LaunchVic ecosystem mapping report from 2008, so the data is a little bit old, but it does give you some more examples of startups here in Victoria. And the last one is Startup Victoria's Linktree. Has anyone here heard of Linktree before? Okay, so this is one to watch. So Linktree is a Melbourne-based startup. It started off as a quick hack workaround for Instagram, where you could only add one link in your Instagram bio, and celebrities and businesses always have more than one link. They want to take you to their website, to their Facebook page, to their Spotify, to their blog, like whatever it might be. So Linktree basically built a platform where you could have all of your links in one place. It's now got, they are getting 48,000 new users a day. They just got $12 million of funding from the US. They have customers like Alicia Keys, Jamie Oliver. They're massive. You will definitely hear of Linktree after today. So check out Startup Vic's Linktree. That's got everything you need, our website. You can join our Slack as well, so you can jump into the Startup Victoria Slack community, introduce yourself, start to build your entrepreneurial network. You can check out all of our content. It's free. There's lots of education on there, both hard and soft skills. You can watch that on our YouTube, come to some of our upcoming events. One that we actually do have coming up this weekend, sorry, Fran, if I can give that a cheeky plug, but we have a online startup weekend that we're hosting with Techstars, which is one of the biggest accelerator programs in the world. And that is an opportunity to build a new idea. So you experience team formation, building out an MVP or a prototype for your idea with a working group, and then you get access to mentors, education workshops across the weekend, and it all culminates in a final demo day style presentation on the Sunday to a panel of judges. So really good opportunity to build your entrepreneurial network, maybe find a co-founder and actually learn some of these skills that we've been talking about today, and that's free. Registrations close on Friday morning, I believe.
I love that plug segue. Excellent. Yeah, did you put that in the chat, by the way?
I
specifically to Techstars?
I
saw some people like nodding along who might be interested in that. So while you're maybe hunting for the link, to pop it in the chat for people to potentially sign up, I just want to mention some of the things that people have raised in the chat. Someone who was here just then was John Parkinson, who says that he's starting a VC firm and looking to seed invest in startups, and he's just casually left his phone number and email there for anyone who's interested. So maybe screenshot that or copy and paste that if you're looking for some seed investment in your own company. And then we've also had a question here from Chris, who's asked, Judy, if you have a product, how do you get it out in the public space to be able to sell it?
Frustratingly, the answer is depends. Depends on what the product is. But I'll just take an example. Let's say, I don't know, let's think really bad. Like, let's say you've come up with a physical product. Maybe you're selling laundry detergent online in a subscription box, which is a real business called The Dirt Company. Check it out. Let's say, so you'll probably have an MVP version, so you probably don't want to spend thousands of dollars on product. Physical tech IoT device, great. So I'm going to assume you haven't got a whole batch of product in a warehouse somewhere, unless you've got lots of money to waste. I'm assuming you've just got the idea and the design. You could put up a Kickstarter campaign is one option that a lot of people do, just to test the market before they invest a lot of money in building something. So put together a video showcasing a prototype or an MVP, and have a campaign where customers can buy ahead of time. And once you hit your campaign, that also gives you funding to fuel the first line of your product run. You could also do a quick and cheap landing page to build a website on a website builder like Squarespace or something like that. Go to GoDaddy, get a registry domain, get a website, and spend a little bit of money on Facebook ads or some social media ads or some Google ads, and try and direct traffic to, based on who your target demographic is, to that website, and get people to click the buy now button. Ideally, basically try and get as much customer traction as you can before you spend money on your product out the door. That would be my advice.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Judy, for that really quick lesson in lean startup and MVP, which stands for minimum viable products, for anyone who isn't across the lingo. I'm just wanting to welcome any other questions if anyone wants to yell out or type it in the chat box, because we do have 8 more minutes left.
Yep, I think you mentioned it before, I missed it. But as a developer, where should I look for a domain expert co-founder who has a startup idea?
Ooh, great. We need more of you, Brendan. People are always looking for technical co-founders, especially this new wave. Okay, so the first place is I would go, there's a jobs board like a co-founder ops jobs board in the Startup Victoria Slack. So I would join the Startup Victoria Slack. It's free. Go to that jobs and co-founder channel and introduce yourself. If you've got a LinkedIn or a CV, or just let people know like what your skills are and what type of business you'd ideally like to work on. And then people will contact you directly through Slack. You'll probably get inundated, just a heads up. So maybe be a little bit specific about types of businesses you're most interested in. Another place to do so is like at the events like hackathons that I mentioned before. Another channel would be Startup Victoria runs a structured networking event every second week. It's called Founder Connect. And the idea is to connect people with potential co-founders, early stage employees, investors, partners, customers. And it's a 1-hour event. It's either held over breakfast or lunch, alternating Thursdays. And what you experience is 7-minute one-on-one conversations, and you go through that 7 times. So you meet 7 new people every week in the startup community as well. It's that one's a bit more hit and miss, but it's a really good way to build your network.
What was that called again, sorry?
That's called Founder Connect by Startup Vic. If you click on in the Linktree link that I posted, if you click on get tickets for our upcoming events, that will take you to Startup Victoria's Eventbrite page. And I would just bookmark that, because I think the next Founder Connect is on the 19th of November at 8 a.m. And then once that goes live, you'll be able to book a ticket. I think it's like $5 a ticket.
Cool,
Awesome.
thanks.
Great question, Brendan. Thank you. And good info, Judy. Tops. So I lied. I was like, we have 8 minutes, but I actually want to finish a little bit early because I know everyone's like rushing off to the next meeting, especially Judy. So any other questions at all? Might just take one more, or if anyone wants to.
In the chat, Fran, around government grants for startups.
Yeah,
so yeah, so we actually just last week, so every Friday, Startup Vic hosts an education event called the Startup Success Series, where we take a common question that founders normally ask, and we invite experts and answer it. Last week, we did government grants and incentives with William Park. So I think a little later this week, we will post a recording of that event along with a list of all of the government grants and incentives and instructions and advice that was provided. And it will go on this page of our website, which I've just posted a link to. So again, I just sort of bookmark that and keep an eye out for that. Another place where we provide all of these updates and all this educational content for free is the Startup Victoria newsletter. I know that sounds like a really lame call to action, like subscribe for another email that you'll probably just delete. But if you're interested in this space, honestly, it is really good. It's disgustingly ugly. It's not well designed, but it's got a huge amount of content in it. It is basically this huge digest of all startup events, news, jobs, stories, and sort of goings on across the ecosystem. We send that out every week. So I would subscribe to that as well.
Amazing. I've got 2 more questions. One is a little bit self-serving because I know people are starting to run off. I just want to ask to everyone who's made it here, and also thank you for making it. If you can pop in the chat if you would prefer to have more live or virtual events coming up over the next couple of months, because OCGA are about to put their events programming together. So if you just want to put in the chat maybe live or virtual, just let us know your preference so that we can, tailor our events for you around that. And Judy, if you've got another minute, I'm just going to sneak one very last question in from Brendan, which was, in an increasingly globalized environment, is the choice of physical location that important?
This is a question that is up for debate at Startup Vic as well, because before the pandemic, we were a primarily in-person events company, and we had to pivot to be a virtual business overnight as well. Like we run like 3 or 4 events every week. So, I think what we will see, and what I'm observing in a lot of other conversations with founders and other entrepreneurs who are making the same kind of decision, like, do we go back to the office? What do we have? Is this sort of hybrid model where you'll have greater support for people who would like to work from home and who have actually found that they do their best work from home, and then some who have the option to come into the office. So you'll have rotating rosters for health and safety reasons, but you'll also have different preferences catered for. I don't think the physical location will entirely die. There are still a lot of people that crave that human interaction, that serendipitous connection and creativity that happens around the water cooler. So I think there'll always be that physical location, and a lot of founders still crave like those physical artifacts, like their own space, their own place that they can decorate in a way that represents their culture and sort of how they like to present themselves to the world. So I think there'll be a hybrid model basically where we'll see definitely still a physical place for people to connect and express themselves, but a balance of productivity, well-being and support for a diverse workforce.
Amazing. Well, I think that brings us to the end of today. Thank you everyone so much for making the time to jump online with us. I'm loving that there's been a bit of virtual networking as well. Not sure if you saw Brandon, Alex did a call out to you, so check that out in the chat. She's in the throes of setting up a health tech company in the mental health space, so get on it. And also for anyone who's interested in that seed investment, there was a number and an email earlier up in the chat from John Parkinson. But Judy, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everybody for taking time out of your day, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much. Very most interesting, very enjoyable.
Good.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was fantastic. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to the upcoming ones.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, please, everyone's welcome.
Brendan, I'll just text you. Brendan, I'm just going to send you my mobile number, Brendan.
Okay.
In that thing. Yeah. Okay.
Just on Zoom. Can you believe it?
Oh, really? I'll call you back.
That's all. I'm just trying. Okay. Getting out of it.
Fran, do you need me to hang around?
No, all good, Judy. That was fantastic. I think everyone got a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
No worries.
Thanks so much for your time. We'll stay in touch.
Sorry.
Thanks, Judy. That was great.
Oh yeah, no worries. I hope are you in the startup community already, Brendan?
No, just thinking about it.
Yeah, come on over. We need people with your skills. So yeah, please jump in.
Like to do that transition of one day a week of work on your own thing.
That's it. I've been there before. Yeah. All right. Well, maybe Izzy, Katie, and Fran, if you get any feedback, just send it through. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, that was fantastic. Really, I know. I love the Your Grocer guy because he used to be with Thank You Water, and then and I actually worked for Thank You Water for a while. Pretty long story. I did my master's in social investment out at Swinburne. I think I was mentioning anyway. So yeah, I love this space anyway. Cool.
Yeah, it's a really cool space. Morgan's a good friend. Morgan and his wife, Nicola.
Yeah, Morgan, that's right. Yeah.
he's actually one of our board directors, so I get to
Yeah.
harass him to come and help us with the community as well, and he's very generous with his time. We're very lucky to have him.
Yeah, he's awesome. He did one of our very initial speaking events for one of our social investment things, and he just got out of Thank You Water and was kind of like, oh, I'm starting up my Your Grocer thing. And we're like, oh, why'd you leave Thank You Water? Anyway.
Yeah, now everyone's like,
There he is.
Your
Yeah.
Grocer. But like, this is the thing. It's like, have you ever seen that video of, it's old now, but like that music festival where there's that one crazy guy dancing, and then like a second person, that is like founders, honestly. It's like, everyone's like, that guy's weird doing a weird thing, and then he gets a co-founder, and like, oh, yeah, and then like a couple early stages, and then it becomes a crowd, and then like by the time they've done all the hard work, and everyone was like, that's not going to work, then you get all of the hangers like, this is so cool, and everyone's like, this and that's like exactly what the founder journey is.
There you go. I even took the guys from Who Gives a Crap to Timor, because I used to work for WaterAid as well, and toured them around to see the actual water stuff going on. So yeah, I'm kind of like from the for-purpose side, who takes the money from the not-for-profit, or from the guys that, well, entrepreneurs rather. Yeah, awesome space to be in. So I'd love to do a lot more of this sort of stuff within OCGs, and we've even introduced our social impact program. All those, I'm trying to get a bit more of this into our space at All Caring, because I think there's a lot of interest for it, and it's an area we can get a lot of traction and engagement from. But yeah,
I think something that I think would be really interesting, like, so a problem that the ecosystem has is, and like I think is perhaps a good overlay with the alumni. Like, I'm making some wild assumptions here, but like, I'm going to assume that a majority of Carey alumni, there'll be a portion of high net worth individuals in there who probably have an investment portfolio, who probably don't invest in startups. And maybe bringing in someone who is doing investor training to teach people how to be startup investors would be really cool, because that's a problem that we have. We don't have enough angels and we don't have enough seed. So if you've got access to that market, that would actually be really great. And a company I'm sure would love to come and talk is the Wade Institute, which is the entrepreneurial arm of Melbourne University. They have a program called the VC Catalyst program. I'm sure they'd love when they have registrations open as part of their recruitment of participants, because it's a paid course. I'm sure they'd invest the time as a marketing exercise.
Well, there was a guy up here today, what's his name? Well, that was John Parkinson, saying that he's got VC. He's up for it.
Yeah.
So there you go. So definitely there's a community out there.
Yeah.
So let's see how we can work. I'll get Frances and Izzy and I will stay in touch.
Yep.
And get up.
I think I know some people at the Wade Insto as well that I can reach out to. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the guy that runs it these days, Rashan. I can't remember his last name. Yeah. Anyway, I do have to run, but it's been really nice to
thanks, Judy, for 2 hours. Yeah. Thanks, Fran. Are you coming tonight, Fran, to our little meeting?
I am actually. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you.
Yes.
Hi. What did you guys think?
Oh my God, that was amazing. That would have to probably be one of the better ones, I think, as far as content and interest. And there's John Parkinson, who's put his hand up and said, I'm a venture capitalist if you want. And no, it was really.
You stopped recording this part, actually.
Probably better, yeah.
God, sorry.
Yeah.
Stop.
I think we can edit